Oh my. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Aftermath. So, this section of the video is going to be spoiler-free, which is a completely original concept, so let's move on without looking further into it. This movie is small. It feels small. It never gives you a sense of, like, the vastness of the consequences, or the plot, or just the vastness of the story. It feels small. And many people have likened this feeling to it being more like the pilot episode to a series, which of course it was originally meant to be, rather than a film, which is what it's been presented as. And I agree. It does feel more like a pilot episode, which, of course, a TV series would have a smaller budget, so it would have to be a smaller story. It's also not particularly Star Trek. The concept of Section 31 gives it an opportunity to sort of explore the morality of the organization and its necessity, or whether its ends justify its means. It doesn't do that. It doesn't go into that at all. Again, it's very small, and if it was a bit larger, it would have gone into that. It doesn't. So, as a film, it's lacking. As Star Trek, it's lacking. So, why am I saying it's good? First, I'm going to give you a brief summary of the plot, which I can't be bothered to write down into the script that I'm referencing here, so I'm going to ad-lib it from memory. So, this film has three parts. The introduction and setup, then there's the second part, random side quest, which is tangentially related to the main story, and the finale. This is not an uncommon setup for films. There's often the biggest eyebrow-raising thing there is the random side quest in the middle, but a lot of films have that. Like in Star Trek, the 2009 film, they have that section on Delta Vega where Kirk is ejected from the ship because Spock is angry at him, and he somehow manages to land on the exact spot, almost exact spot on that moon, where old Spock is hanging about, and also is very close to a Star Trek outpost. Starfleet outpost. Anyway, that is a little side quest thing with, like, exposition happening. This side quest isn't for exposition, we'll get into that later. So, first, there is a sort of Mission Impossible, sort of fourth wall breaking mission brief.
This is Control with a priority message for Alpha Team Leader.
That presumably the Section 31 team received, and we are given it as if we're watching it in the first person, and it's nice. Basically, it explains the past and everything, and I'm missing a bit. I think before this. So, starting off, we have a little flashback section to Philippa's history in the Terran Empire, sort of when she's a young adult, and the Empire is currently trying to select an emperor. And obviously the Terrans, they value strength and ruthlessness above all else, so they've come up with Squid Game, but the winner is going to become the Emperor of the Empire. So a bunch of deadly stuff happens. We don't see it, which I feel like we should have seen it. We're told it, and it's sort of emotionally acted, so it's not terrible, but we're told this from Philippa's point of view. So anyway, the aim of the challenge was to end up with one remaining person who would then become the Emperor. They've ended up with two. And on a side note, but it is related, those two, one of them being Philippa, because of this traumatic situation, had a sort of trauma bonding sort of situation. And they're very close now. Possibly romantically, but I don't think it's explicitly said. But very close, but only one of them can succeed, and the other will become a permanent servant of the successor. So simply, they need to come up with another challenge. One that will reduce the number from 2 to 1. They come up with sending the participants to their homes, where their families live, and requiring them to, murder them. Anyway, so Philippa murders her whole family. We see that. And she's not, like, doing this, like, uncaringly. Like, she's clearly emotional about it. But she does go through with it. And then a bunch of Terrans show up with, like, what looks like the Charon, but I don't think that was commissioned yet. So just a big flagship, and some sort of maybe Chancellor, Prime Minister sort of person comes down and is like, congratulations, your opponent did not murder their whole family, you're now the Emperor, and your opponent's life is in your hands. Wait, hold on, they said there was supposed to be an eternal servant. But then, okay, somehow she ends up with a sword that was in a fire, so it's like red hot, and her opponent's kneeling before her. And then they have this little moment. They come up with this phrase. Hold on.
We are two.
But one.
I don't know what that means. Anyway, she whispers that little phrase into his ear, and then takes this red-hot sword and slaps it against his face and runs it up and down a little bit. Just rub it in there a little bit. It's really fucking gruesome, to be honest. But, he survives. And then we get onto the main intro, to the present and the Prime Universe. I need my script. Where Philippa is now in the Prime Universe, and in the 23rd century again, after being sent back to the present from the 32nd century. She's basically settled into a sort of retirement, where she's not really engaged in galactic events. She's just sitting there on her station, running it relatively chill, actually, compared to how she ran the Terran Empire, but, being retired. But then she gets approached by this random person who she develops something of like a rapport with. And he's like, I've got some really rare drugs that you thought never existed, didn't exist anymore. You want to buy them? And they go into the back to her office. She takes some of the drugs. She's like, very nice. And then she sits down and she goes, I know you're Section 31. What the fuck are you doing on my station? Thanks for the drugs, by the way. And then there's Section 31 guy, because obviously it's a Section 31 guy. He's is a little disgruntled about things because the plan was to knock her out unconscious and get her out of the way. But now she is in the way because she knows who they are. So he decides he's going to get her in on the mission, because of course he's been briefed on her, so he knows a little bit about her, and that she used to be in Section 31. So they talk about it, and the mission brief is that there's a bioweapon that Section 31 has heard talk about that's going to be sold on her station in like a few hours, or a few minutes. And obviously, Section 31 doesn't like that. This station, by the way, isn't in Federation space, which is why Section 31's doing this, rather than Starfleet just going out to a station in their space and doing something about it. He's basically like, hey, you want to come out of retirement and help us? Because apparently you're, like, really good at what you do, and we could use the help. And also, I have something of an attachment to you because of the mission record that I've seen in Parallels. We'll get into that. And she says yes, and they go down to their ship, which is kind of... I'm not overly fond of the design, but it's very Section 31. And we meet the team. We've got Fuzz, who looks Vulcan, but he's very, laughing a lot. Turns out Fuzz is, a really tiny creature who's actually piloting the Vulcan, which is a mech suit. And he's Irish? Very funny, by the way. And then we've got the cyborg, who's not very bright, which they tell us, rather than showing us. Who's Zeph? Then we have a Deltan, who doesn't really matter, but Deltans sort of have this sort of Deltan thing going on, where they seduce people with just, their mind-sexy vibes. And we have a Comaloid called Quasi, who, if you'll recall, Comaloids are from Star Trek VI. We saw someone who they met in on a Rurapenthe, and they can shapeshift. They are shapeshifters, and they have very yellow eyes, which is the only giveaway that they're shapeshifted into something else, because those yellow eyes are always retained. And lastly, we have Rachel Garrett, who we've met before in Star Trek. She's the Red Lady from Star Trek Pod Season 3, and she's the captain of the Enterprise C from Star Trek The Next Generation Season 3. Or Season 4, from that, episode where they meet the Enterprise C from way back when. It's parallel timeline sort of thing. This is her as a lieutenant, and she's a lot younger. She's basically there on detachment, because Starfleet just can't go there on their own. They want to still send someone who is Starfleet, so that the whole mission isn't too un-Starfleet. Then they get to laying out the plan, which is a whole heist thing, and all intricate and everything of how they're going to get the payload, which is a bioweapon that's being carried by the scientist guy. Georgia goes, I got a better idea. Much better idea. She basically meets the scientist guy, she tosses a little device onto the payload, and then puts one on herself. And then both the payload and herself start vibrating. Anyway, they're vibrating at a different frequency to everything around them, which means that nothing in the universe can interact with them, but they can interact with each other, as in Giorgio and the payload. I mean, they can also interact with the artificial gravity systems of the station, because they don't just float off, and they can interact with the floor, obviously, because then they don't just fall through it, but let's not think too hard about that, because it's actually quite a unique idea, I think, and I like it. So everything's going to plan. She's like, I'm going to take this from you now, and then Zeph and the captain come in, and they punch the scientist a little bit, and then, oh no, a guy just walked through the wall. That guy also has one of those devices. He's completely clothed in black, and he goes for the payload, and there's a fight between Giorgio and this new guy who we don't know. And it's very nice. I like the fight. It's unique because of the, like, phase shifting and be able to go through things. I like that. They didn't do nearly enough with it, but what they did with it was good enough. Basically, there's a whole chase. They go through all the station, they run on tables, they disturb the singers, and the payload goes through a wall, and then Giorgio's device malfunctions as she's going through that wall to retrieve it, and her ankle gets stuck in the wall, and she's like inches away from being able to reach the payload. And then this guy comes there, and he opens the box, and Giorgio's like, no, I know this thing, I made this thing. And she recognizes the payload. And the guy just takes it, and he beams to his ship, and he warps away. God, what happens next? Oh, then we have a flashback to when Giorgio's, like, emperor again, but like an old emperor, not when she was a young emperor. And that guy from the beginning, who she, like, burned the fucking face of, comes in with this device that we just saw. And he says the scientists have taken their own lives for making this device because it's so incredibly horrible. And then he hands it to Giorgio. And we don't know much about this device yet, other than it's obviously really, 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 really dangerous and terrible. And she has a little conversation with him because he's, like, weeping for her eternal soul sort of thing, and that she's going to hell. Not like religiously, but I'm sort of trying to put it into words somehow. And they have this little conversation, and she asks him, if I had made a different choice back in the day, if I hadn't taken that sword and rubbed it in your face, if I had asked you to run away with me and forget the Empire, would you have done it? And he said, I would have. Then. Now, not so much, because you're like a horrible person. You've ruined everything. You had a chance to make it better. And you didn't. You just kept the Empire being just completely awful. And I'm gonna die now, because it turns out I poisoned myself. And she says a very awkward line, which I didn't love. And she says, I forbid you to die. And then he dies. And then we're back in the present. Giorgio was stunned by the captain on the station and was brought now to where we are, which is a Section 31 safe house somewhere deep underground on some abandoned planet. And they have a little conversation. And Giorgio says, I know that device. I had it made. But I will not tell you anything until I know why you're so interested in me, because you are obviously quite interested in me. Otherwise, you would have just gone through with the original plan. So in order to get the information that she knows on the device, the captain sits down and tells her he's an augment from way back in the 21st century, from the eugenics, 20th century actually, which is odd because they sort of changed that, so it happened in the 21st century. Anyway, he says 20th century in the eugenics wars. Basically then, an augment lady, like, massacred his whole family, but something about him, there was a quality about him that she liked. So she took him and turned him into an augment and turned him into a follower, and then she became just this dictator of this little section of whatever part of the world they controlled, and he became part of that and did awful things, apparently. And so they're similar in that way, that they both have done things that they now regret to an extent, that they don't feel they can redeem themselves for, but they would want to. Which, I mean, it works. It works. It does work. I think it works. They sort of, the way it's acted and everything, it makes it work. Then she reveals that scientist guy must be from the Terran universe because that device is from the Terran universe. I had it made. I thought it was destroyed. Obviously, my scientists betrayed me and kept it. And then they go to interrogate the scientists. And it's a fun scene. It's fun. There's not much to say about it. It's sort of like torture scene, and then he reveals, yes, I'm from the Terran universe. Turns out I got here from a portal that's pretty much permanently there, more or less, and is like consistently opens on a schedule that I can get through, and that, I mean, anyone can get through. A fleet of Terrans could get through. And once they realize that this device is gone, they're going to come through here and they're going to conquer the entire Federation. Basically, he wanted to move to this universe, the Prime Universe, and live there off of the money that he got from selling this terrible weapon. Oh, I don't know if she's explained it yet, but the weapon, it's not really said what it does, but it's sort of... They said something about a chain reaction and it being capable of, like, spreading across different star systems. And I don't know how many, but obviously massively destructive, and billions of lives would be lost. But outside of that, they want to know who the hell was the guy that turned up, who was obviously the buyer. Wait, I don't think we actually figure out who the buyer is. Because they say that it isn't the guy dressed in black who was vibrating. What they say is that he was there because someone in Section 31 who received that specific mission brief, they must have told the guy who tried to steal the device and succeeded, they must have told him that the device was there and when it was happening and when to ambush the Section 31 team and hijack the device. And then the ship explodes randomly, and it crashes, and they're now stuck on a planet the scientist has burned to death, but now they have a problem. They have a mole, a traitor amongst them, and they don't know who it is, and also they're trapped on the planet, and they have no way off of it, for now. But Rachel Garrett has gone scouting about, because she was bored, I guess, and found an abandoned garbage scow that might be able to fly. So they need to find a way off of this thing. They need to contact Starfleet or Section 31 to let them know this is kind of a crisis. There's a weapon of mass destruction about, and there might be the Terrans who go looking for it, find this portal thing, and then conquer our universe. So there's an objective. And they have an antenna. They have a communication system on the planet. But there's a certain coil thing that they need, which has been stolen. So they have work to do, but they have an imposter traitor situation, so they go into teams, where Giorgio, Quasi, and Fuzz, I think, Vulcan guy who's a mech suit, go to the freighter while Rachel, the captain, and Zeph work on trying to fix the antenna. Effectively, if you're unaware, this is the part of the movie, the section that is the side quest that is tangentially related to everything else. Basically, they go to the freighter, they figure out it's got a missing coil, it can't fly without that, so they're pretty screwed. They go back to the antenna place, but Zeph has disappeared, and the captain's gone looking for him, and Rachel and the captain have been separated, and then they all regroup back at the antenna, and the piece that was missing is back, but it's now been fried to hell, so it's completely useless. But one of them, very likely Rachel Garrett because she was separated for a time, fixed it, transmitted a message, likely to an accomplice, that guy in black, and then did something to Zeph. Anyway, Zeph likely saw who it was that attacked Zeph, or... No, maybe at this point... So at this point, it's either Rachel or Zeph that are the traitor. They go looking for Zeph for, like, evidence of anything. They find him, and he's dead. But he likely recorded whatever happened to him on his little mech suit thing, which I don't know if I've mentioned. But it'll take time to download the data to a tricorder and actually see what he recorded. But he's got a hair on him. A hair that is long, brown, and most certainly belongs to Rachel Garrett. And then they scan Rachel Garrett, and she's got blood under one of her fingernails. And so it seems a lot like it's definitely Rachel. But she's Starfleet, so that doesn't really track. So they strap her to a chair, and they try to question her. But eventually, obviously, it's not Rachel. And I actually figured this out, like, right at the garbage scout section, because that mech suit Vulcan guy started acting exceptionally robotically.
Aren't you coming? Yes, I couldn't be more excited.
And I was like, Tiny Guy is no longer in the mech suit and has fiddled with stuff and is obviously the traitor. But now it's revealed, because the recording comes out, they get the recording from Zeph's suit, and they see it, and he basically just killed himself, but not willingly. So someone took control of his suit. And that would have been enough. They could have had a little section where everyone's like, oh my god, it can only be this guy, and Georgia, like, points a phaser at him and is like, stay where you are. But instead, they have Georgia sitting there, like, having this revelation, and she has flashbacks to all the situations and all the things that she's recalling that are like, oh, this is lining up, it's him. And then she stands up, and despite us already having seen all this information in those flashbacks, and it already having been shown, despite that, she stands up, and then she explains what the flashbacks already showed us anyway. So literally just, not literally, figuratively just whacking the audience over the head multiple times, over and over again with information, because apparently we're stupid. That's the biggest problem I have with this arc, because I love it. I love the, like, investigation bit and the whodunit sort of thing. But then they confront Fuzz, who, at first I was wondering why he didn't, like, leave the mech again and just go hide somewhere. But in my headcanon, maybe he's too small to be locked onto by transporters of the time, so he has to stay with the mech in order to be able to be locked on by his accomplice. That's the only thing I can think of. It's not really explained. Basically, he still has control of Zeph's body, which is dead, but the mech suit is still functional, and he creates a distraction and then jumps onto this little, like, transport car that goes through these tubes underground in the planet and just zooms off. And then the crew, other than Rachel, get on to follow him on another car. And Rachel, I don't know what Rachel does. She sort of just breaks her way out of her restraints and then nothing else. They have Rachel break out of her restraints, and then we don't see her again until the crisis is resolved anyway. It's a nice moment, but, why? Why bother? Why not just... I mean, she could, like, hang about with, like, the crew. Why did they leave her behind? Just for her to break out of her restraints and then not get utilized. Anyway, they end up in a situation where Giorgio and Fuzz are on this little platform alone. They get shot up into the sky and they stay there for a bit because anti-gravity, magnetic levitation, whatever. And Fuzz, obviously stalling, does the whole villain exposition. Oh, you've caught me. I'm going to tell you my whole entire plan. And tells her that the guy from the beginning, whose name I can't remember, who she brushed his face with a little bit of a hot sword, he's alive. And he's the accomplice. And Georgia's, like, very shocked, very stunned, not realizing that he's obviously stalling because of this shock and stun. And he gets beamed up. And we get a debrief scene where they talk about it, and the debrief scene and the subsequent scenes that connect this part to the final part aren't really particularly important. Turns out the captain actually had the coil that the garbage scout needed to fly. He just hid it until they could sort out the traitor situation. So they plug in the little coil, and the garbage scout flies, and they go in pursuit. And it seems like the garbage scout doesn't actually have the ability to communicate via subspace, because they're going with the garbage scow alone rather than comming Starfleet and or Section 31 and getting some actual ships to the necessary location, but maybe they're too far away. Anyway, the plan is basically to... What is the plan? So, the motivation for the small guy is that the small people used to control a large part of the galaxy, and with the Federation in, like, ruins, they will again. I don't know why the guy from the beginning wants to destroy part of the Federation. Maybe it's because it's where Philippa lives, and so he's like, she lives here, I'm going to ruin it for her. I think that's the only motivation we get. It's a bit shallow, but anyway, they meet up at this nebula, which is actually two consistent ion storms that collide and recollide over and over again, creating this consistent opening to the Terran universe. And the garbage scow catches up with this vessel that's obviously armed, more than the garbage scow is. The garbage scow only has shields and tractor beams and garbage. So their plan is to just go in close to that enemy vessel, grab them with the tractor beams, which, by the way, this concept of like tractor beaming and just stalling and then all of this, the whole combat sequence is quite unique and I love it. I love it. Basically, they grab onto the garbage scow and Philippa and the captain beam aboard. They go fight some people. Which isn't massively important. There's like a confrontation where Philippa's like, why are you doing this? And he's just like really sad about being betrayed by her and is like, I want to kill you very much and everything you love in this universe. And there's a big fight and it doesn't really, not much happens other than the small guy leaving the suit on autopilot again to fight the captain and going off into his own ship to try and get to the garbage scow and destroy them so that the main ship can get back on course and get through the opening. Wait, why do they need to get through the opening to use the device? He goes out, so now Rachel and Kazi, who are still on the Junker, have a problem, because they have no weapons, and now the small person in a little ship is pursuing them, trying to get aboard, and is going to almost certainly destroy everything. So, I mean, this is very summarized, but this is the third act of the movie, so there's a lot of time that goes into this, but in summary, it's kind of short. Rachel goes into the cargo hold, she finds out that there's a creepy little drone that has some sort of explosive power source, and she pours something on there, and they jettison it, and they destroy the ship. And Rachel is very, like, sort of, due to her interactions with Giorgio, they set it up earlier, but Giorgio's like, you're a chaos demon, aren't you? You love the chaos. You say you're Starfleet, but you really, really love chaos, don't you? And that sort of comes full circle here, when it like embraces the chaos and goes a little mad and goes into the cargo hold, does some crazy stuff, and then almost blows their ship up when they don't know which is the button to jettison the cargo and which is the self-destruct. But they hit the right one, and they destroy the small guy. Back on the enemy ship, Giorgio and what's-his-name have a fight, and he gets the upper hand, and he's like shoving a sword down into her cheek, which is really, really unpleasant to watch. But she manages to like kick him a bit and make the sword fly up and hit his neck, which, I know nothing about fighting, so sure, I'm sure that happens, probably. Anyway, and then they go and do the cliche thing of having him on his deathbed while Giorgio's like, no, I didn't want you to die. He's like, I forgive you sort of thing, and I always needed you to show me the truth about myself. Which, like, he was literally shoving a sword into her cheek, and now he has the change of heart like this? Seriously? There wasn't a better way you could do this character development? Instead of, once again, hammering it over our heads in a way that doesn't even seem realistic? Anyway, then they beam back to the Junker, and everyone's fine, everyone's happy, and the film basically just ends there. On a cliffhanger for, like, more missions, because obviously it feels more like a pilot than a standalone film, but some films do that too. Anyway, that's the end of it. From that, you might have gotten the impression that I have a lot of problems with this movie and the writing quality, and you'd be right. Why do I like it, though? I don't know, I just do. I mean, it's not Star Trek. They didn't do the Star Trek thing, so they didn't explore philosophical discussion. But as, like, character development and exploration of characters and interactions with different characters, as a character story, I think it's fantastic. Like, I came out of this knowing a hell of a lot more and empathizing a hell of a lot more with Philippa than I did previously, because they didn't really flesh out her character very much on Discovery. But here they did. We get a backstory, we get, like, her profound regret and self-hatred because of what she did, and the person that she loved that she lost because of how awful she became. I loved that. I think they did that really well. I mean, the motivations of the guy she loved could have been a bit more fleshed out and maybe more three-dimensional, but overall, I think they did it quite well. And the other characters, Zeph dies early on, so he doesn't really matter. Fuzz is basically just mustache-twirling villain, very nice, but the fact that he's small makes it very, very, not unique. It's a good storytelling tool to have this character who's got a mech suit he can put on autopilot and then go somewhere else where no one knows. That was brilliant, and I loved that reveal. No, I didn't love the reveal, but I love the concepts that were involved in that little whodunit section in revealing that Fuzz was able to do all of this and how he was able to do all of this. Again, please don't hammer me over the head with these revelations. I figured it out at the fracking garbage scout section like 10 minutes earlier, so you didn't need to fracking... Anyway... with the captain, I like that the captain's inclusion is nice, because the captain has a nice little understanding with Philippa that really makes it worthwhile, and I really think they did that quite well. Rachel has a much smaller arc, but it's very nice too. Like the letting go of her reservations and being a bit more chill, and then saving the day with like some unstarfleet wacky plan to use a doll and blow up things. And the whole... everything there with Rachel, quite nice. Quasi doesn't have much to do, but he's fun. So, yeah. The Dalton. I didn't even mention the Dalton. I didn't even tell you when she died, but she died in that original chase sequence with that other guy who was vibrating in a black suit. That's a very odd sentence if you took it out of context. So, in short, this film as a film is a bit shit. This film as a Star Trek film is lacking. They could have gone further with it. But this film as a story, I think, it's compelling. And that's the most important thing with stories, is that they have to be compelling. The philosophical debate, that's an added bonus. They could have beat you over the head with certain concepts a bit less, but as a whole, it's very good, I think, as a story, as a standalone story. And I think it's worth giving it a chance. I certainly don't think it deserves 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. Tomatoes. So, in short, on paper, it's shit, but I don't care about the paper. I like it anyway. So, on that note, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.